Gender in childhood and youth. Introduction, defining categories. Imagine a newly born pair of twins in hospital, wrapped in blankets. You have been told that one is a boy and one is a girl, but it might be difficult to tell which is which. 5 years later, you can probably answer the question very easily, even though the twins are probably still very similar in height, weight, and bone structure. There are now many clues in their hairstyle, clothing, appearance, and behavior that help you determine the boy and the girl. Indeed, if you are uncertain, you might feel uncomfortable asking, but why is this? This chapter will explore how gender comes to be so important in shaping how adults think and treat children, and how children and young people think about themselves and experience the world. It introduces the concept that gender is a social construction rather than solely defined by biology. This means that the way gender is thought about and experienced can vary between different societies and across history. For example, in the UK and other global north societies today, high-heeled shoes are seen as women's clothing. However, in the 17th century Britain, high-heeled shoes were considered men's clothing. While this may be fairly trivial, it is an illustration that aspects of gender we take for granted are socially constructed. Language and terminology. Language around gender is changing and contested as people seek compelling and comfortable ways to describe themselves. This chapter aims to use accurate and respectful language, seeking to use words that respect the terms that individuals and communities use for themselves. However, different terminology may be current by the time you read this chapter, and different groups or individuals may find different terms preferable, or members of the group may disagree on the terms they prefer. Like all children, the twins in the first paragraph have been assigned a sex at birth, designated as a boy or a girl, based on the biological factors discussed in the box later. Sex usually refers to the biological features associated with being a man or a woman. Many of these do not emerge until puberty, when hormonal signals initiate changes to the body in muscle and fat distribution and body hair growth. These are known as secondary sexual characteristics. Primary sexual characteristics are those directly related to reproduction and present from birth, the genitals and gonads, ovaries or testes. Gender can be defined as the social, cultural, psychological characteristics and many meaning associated with being a man or a woman, or someone with another gender identity. Gender is flexible, expressed in different ways in different places. For example, in many countries, most childcare is carried out by women. Nurturing and caring for the children is often considered part of being a woman. However, in some social societies, men do as much infant and childcare as the woman, and it is central to their role as men. For example, fathers in the AKA Society of Central Africa hold their children almost 50% of the time, and women are as likely or more likely to hunt. Although gender is constructed socially, it is also psychological, and individual gender identity is a person's internal sense of the gender they feel they are. Most children develop a gender identity consistent with the sex they are assigned at birth. For example, a child assigned as a boy will think as themselves as a boy. However, some grow up to be transgender, meaning they identify with a gender other than that they assigned at birth. That can mean that a child assigned as a boy thinks of themselves as a girl, or it can mean that they identify neither as a boy nor as a girl, but as a non-binary or another gender, meaning their gender is neither male nor female. In recent decades, transgender experience and the idea of gender identities beyond male and female have become more visible. Although they have always existed in some form, see, for example, Paulette's Surtees. Despite this, the dominant conception of gender in many contemporary societies is binary. It has two categories, classifying all people into two genders, seeing masculinity and femininity as distinct and opposite. Boys are seen as different from girls, with different social and cultural norms for how each gender is expected to behave. These norms differ across and within societies, but gender norms and expectations exist everywhere. The gender binary is not equal. Men generally have more social, political, and economic power. However, men and boys can also be disadvantaged by the gender binary. For example, masculinity may be associated with an expectation that men should be self-reliant and suppress fear or sadness, which can contribute to men not seeking help for mental or physical health problems. In addition, gender is not experienced separately from other aspects of identity. Gendered experiences and inequalities are affected by factors such as race and ethnicity, age, and social class. Gendered meaning means something as affected by gender or divided along gender lines. A gendered school uniform, for example, has different requirements for boys and girls. In the rest of the chapter, you will explore the role of gender in children and young people's lives. The chapter looks at how gender norms are produced within different environments, how children navigate binary gendered expectations, and how they understand and experience their own gender in different ways, influenced by other aspects of identity. It covers experiences of boys and girls whose gender identity corresponds with their sex assigned at birth, and of transgender children who face particular challenges in society structured by binary gender. Key points. Gender is an important category in shaping how adults think about children and how children and young people think about themselves and experience the world. Gender is socially constructed. Its meanings can vary between different societies and across history. Gender identity is a person's internal sense of gender, what gender they feel they are. Many contemporary societies view gender as binary. Establishing categories, infancy, and adult expectations of gender. Gender is essential to children's experiences of themselves and of the world. One of the first questions asked of many expecting parents is, will it be a boy or a girl? Or do you know what you're having? A baby. The second question is usually automatically understood, even though the words are not specific, because a shared assumption that gender is fundamental to what a baby will be. While the question technically refers to a baby's sex, it is considered so important because of the role of the gender in shaping expectations about a child. You have already learned about the interplay between nature and nurture, whether particular characteristics result from biological or social causes, or a combination, popular media, and everyday discussions often talk about gendered characteristics as natural and inevitable. Boys may be described as more boisterous than girls in the nursery, but since children are defined as boy or girl before or at birth, it is almost impossible to separate biological influences from social and cultural expectations and ideas about gender. Before birth, those who know the sex of their fetus describe boys' movements as vigorous or strong, while taking about girls' movements as more gentle. But for those who don't know, there is no difference in the way boys' and girls' movements are described. At birth, there are minimal differences between boys and girls' physical, emotional, cognitive, and social abilities. However, adults treat infants differently, shown by psychological research that looks at how adults behave. The Baby X experiment was first carried out in the 1970s in Chicago, USA. A 3-month-old baby dressed in a yellow sleep suit was introduced to volunteers as either Mary or Johnny. Volunteers were asked to play with the baby using a choice of the 3 toys left in the room: a rag doll, a football, and a teething ring. None of the male volunteers presented a football to what they supposed was a girl, but 89% presented her with a doll. Meanwhile, 80% of the women gave the boy a football and 75% presented the girl with a doll. More recent studies have similarly found that adults behave differently towards children based on their gender in multiple aspects of life. One study looked at US mothers' judgments of their children's physical development, asking them to estimate their 11-month-old infant's crawling ability before they tried a new task. Crawling down a steep slope, mothers of girls underestimated and mothers of boys overestimated their performance, although boys and girls did not differ in actual crawling ability. Psychologists Melissa Clearfield and Marie Nelson looked at mothers' language and play with their 6 to 9 and 14-month infants. Again, there were no differences in infant behavior, but mothers talked differently, asking more questions of girls, expecting them to be more verbally expressive while being more instructive to boys, saying "come here" or calling their name. They also played more with the girls leaving. They also played more with the girls, leaving the boys to play independently. Psychologist Ashley Lavelle studied low-income African American, Latino, and white fathers of 2 to 4 years old across the USA over 3 years, surveying them about how often they carried out caregiving, e.g., feeding, physical play, chasing games, literacy, reading books, and social activities, visiting friends or family with their children. Fathers carried out more physical play with the boys and more literacy related activities with the girls. Interestingly, African American fathers engaged in play, caregiving, and visiting more with sons than with daughters. Many psychological studies therefore suggest that parents, caregivers, and even strangers consciously and unconsciously treat children differently based on their assumed gender and have more different expectations of many abilities, even when differences don't exist. Some of these studies were experiments in controlled environments, isolating and changing specific factors to see how these affect behaviors. Of course, Children do not grow up to be controlled environments. There are many influences on their gender development and experiences, and children themselves play an active role interacting with adults, peers, and the environment. After the box below, the next section will consider the ways in which children start to learn about and explore their own gender. Variations in gender and even sex. Most babies are assigned a sex, male or female, at birth. If not before, this is usually straightforward. The doctor looks at the baby's genitals. If it has testes and a penis, it's called a boy. If it has a vagina and a clitoris, it's called a girl. But it is not always that simple. Biologically, there are 5 factors that go towards determining a baby's sex. These are the following: chromosomes, which carry the genetic information in the body cells. Usually girls have two X chromosomes and boys have one X and one Y chromosome. Whether the baby has testes, which will make sperm, or ovaries, which will make eggs. The sex or hormones. Hormones are chemicals that produce particular effects, and men and women tend to have different levels of sex hormones. 4. The internal reproduction organs, like the uterus. 5. The external genitals, like the penis or the clitoris. Most people have a combination of these factors, allowing easy assignation of sex. But for some, the combination is not clear-cut. People whose 5 factors aren't all typically male or typically female is described as having differences in sex development, DSD, sometimes referred to as intersex conditions. In every 2,000 babies, 1 to 2, 1.7%, are born with ambiguous genitals. They can't be easily placed into a category of male or female. This is about the same number as children born with cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, or red hair. These ambiguities can take a number of physical forms. For instance, a person might be born with a large clitoris, or without a vaginal opening, or a particularly small penis. Not everyone with DSD is aware of this. Some forms may not become evident until puberty, and some never do so. The treatment of intersex people provides insight into social ideas about sex and gender. Doctors often perform genital surgery for a more typical appearance. From 1950s until recently, this was carried out without informing the child, who would never be told, and sometimes without even informing the parents, who would be aware that their child was undergoing surgery, but not why. It was thought important that the children's healthy development, that they feel normal. For instance, people who were considered male in most of 5 respects, but had very small penises, had these surgically removed and were raised as girls. Hormone therapy was also sometimes used with children reached the age of puberty.